A warm welcome to the Evolution Show. I'm Johan Landgren. I hope you're great. In the previous two episodes, I talked with Berman, a world-renowned geologist, oil and gas expert. We talked about what I call the perfect energy storm. Art explained how the world's oil and natural gas production humanity is so dependent on may start to decline in the next couple of years. And Art argues that renewable energy will not be enough to replace this decline. Our overall material consumption must decrease significantly as well. I received a lot of response after my conversations with Art, and I really appreciate all the ideas and suggestions you have shared with me in the comment section. One person that reached out to me is the solar entrepreneur and inventor Swenson. He wanted to give his take on Berman's conversation, and today I'm able to share his very interesting perspectives on why we all should invest in solar energy and prepare for very challenging times ahead. And if you're new to the Evolution Show, I'm a full-time investor and writer in sustainable energy, and currently I work on my own energy house that I hope to be able to share more about in upcoming episodes. I hope you like today's conversation, and if you do, don't forget, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Now, let's get going. This is the Evolution Show. Welcome back to the Evolution Show, Swenson.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Yeah, you're with us from California.
Correct. Sunny California,
Yeah.
where it's a cloudy day and we've been getting not just ordinary rain, but we've had what we've learned to call atmospheric rivers.
Yeah. And you reached out to me recently because you actually watched my previous episode with Berman,
Yeah.
because you also know him since way back, I think. I think you were both on the board for ASPO, Association for the Study of Peak Oil and Gas, USA.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know really well about peak oil, the peaking of the oil production and gas in the US. So you're very familiar with that subject.
Sure.
But you're also very much into solar technology, and you're an inventor. And I have made several episodes with you before, so I encourage people to check out those as well to learn more about your different projects. But today I thought we could focus on solar energy and how we can decrease our fossil dependence, and sort of continuing the conversation based on what Art talked about, the imminent decline of oil and gas in the world.
Right.
So, but before we go into all that, could you tell us a little bit about what are you involved with right now in terms of solar projects?
Well, in the past, I built a number of commercial solar systems, including a couple that were staged as solar canopies over parking in parking lots. And on the basis of that, some of these projects, as you see in one that I can show you here, it will look very graceful. And unlike some of the industrially sort of very rectangular looking things, we added a curve to the solar canopy, which makes it looks very graceful. And on the basis of that, we're confident that we can put a system like that over streets, not just over parking lots, and then use that to power a transportation system which runs linearly all along the street below this solar canopy. It provides shade, and especially in the tropics, that's going to be very valuable. And it also provides enough power to run the entire transportation system in a highly resilient manner. Now, California, of all places, where we claim to be the leaders in renewable energy, it turns out that not only do we import about 60% of our energy, but of that, almost 25% comes right through the Straits of Hormuz. The largest hot point in the whole world, the most potentially conflicted region from which we are dependent in a way, so that there was any kind of a disruption from the Middle East, we could be finding ourselves in California facing huge headwinds on energy. And because nobody has been prepared for this by the political community, all the political leadership, people are going to be very surprised. And then very soon after that, there'll be this finger pointing. Oh, it's all because of the Arabs. You know, they did it to us. Well, when you consider that we can have a completely resilient transportation system based only on the energy that lands right here, we can capture right here where we live and use it. And then, of course, the first thing that comes up is people say that solar energy is intermittent. Well, you know, that's an admission that we're dumber than trees. We don't even know as well as trees how to get through the winter. And, you know, I just did a little checkup, and it turns out that there are trees up to, you know, the Arctic Circle is at 66 degrees latitude north. And there are trees that go clear up to 72 degrees. So there are trees that can last without any sunlight at all for a couple of months. So how is it that we can't come up with a redundant, reliable, resilient transportation system on our own without having to go and extract energy that was stored by Mother Nature 100 million years ago?
Yeah, and I can encourage, yeah, and people might wonder what are Ron referring to, but in the previous episode we talked a lot about personal rapid transit,
Yeah.
or pod cars, and that's a transport system you have been very much involved with.
Yeah.
And that's a super way to transport people, and I'll encourage people to check that out. But right now I thought we continue just where you left off, because you talked about redundance and about thinking about it from a big picture, and so, but before we head on to that, people might wonder what kind of projects you've been involved. You mentioned canopies and things like that, but one recent project I think you were involved with was at the eVTOL Joby Aviation's headquarters. I think you helped to install at the parking area some form of solar charging, not solar charging, but solar panels. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in fact, we do have electric chargers on this system. The company we worked with here in Santa Cruz was Plantronics, and they invented the headset that was used on the first Apollo missions to the moon and such. So they became rather famous in modern times. They have developed the Bluetooth style headsets and all of that. Well, their headquarters was here in Santa Cruz, and so at their headquarters we built this solar canopy, which is graceful, which is about 600 megawatts, 600 kilowatts, close to a megawatt. And using that technique, we can have a transportation system that runs continuously along the roadbeds. And so instead of having cars that are automated and still take up space in the community, all we need is a post every 100 feet or so that takes up very little bit of ground space, and have an entire network of transportation clear throughout the community, and costing even less than a roadway costs. And remember, what we're putting on a roadway is asphalt, which is, at the end of the day, it's a toxic substance, and which eliminates all vegetation and everything in its path. So ultimately, what we anticipate we'll be able to do is to cut out a lot of roads and make the community a pedestrian area again, by having the high-speed transportation go overhead and never interface with your pets or your children or yourself getting run over by a car. And an automated car can never solve the laws of physics against a collision. It's impossible, because there's always something that can go wrong at grade level.
Yeah. How far are you in the transport part of that project? You've built the parking with the solar panels for over the parking, and we will be able to show pictures from that. But how far are you in the process of working on the transport system?
Working with associates, there are prototypes being built in our own shop with some new designs that we think will have leverage, and at the same time, we're working with electronic controls, because after all, we're in Silicon Valley. We're working on developing the control system that automates this process. We also have associates that are building full-size test tracks, and there's one company in China, without using solar, that has been able to achieve the basic design principles that we're promoting here ourselves. So it's basically now possible, and it's going to take off like hotcakes, because the word is out now that this is going to be a much more economical transportation system, and it eliminates the safety issues that the automobile and space availability that the automobile inherently impacts.
Yeah, and just for people to know that I've been on 3 Podcast City conferences, and it was very much thanks to you, Ron. You invited me to the first one that I participated in Silicon Valley back in 2015.
Yeah.
And I think it is a super interesting podcast, or PRT, personal rapid transit systems. They are in a few places around the world. You can see them at Heathrow, I think.
Yeah.
And some other places.
South Korea.
But South Korea, yeah, and hopefully soon then in Silicon Valley as well, or in California. But I thought we could move on to talk a little bit also about what Art mentioned in the previous episode.
Right.
It raised a lot of attention and a lot of interesting questions. And I know that you're very familiar with our oil dependence. But one of the kind of the core of discussion, the point that Art was making that I think you agree with, is that if we have a short-term decline of oil and gas in the world, starting with the shale oil and shale gas in the US, we're in big trouble, because, as you mentioned, we're not prepared for a society that is not using oil and gas, at least in the short term.
Right.
And his point is that we can't replace this with renewables. That's just a dream. So what's your take on that? And yeah.
Well, see, replacement is a very, very important concept. What I found out is that if I were to replace the regular lighting I have in my house with LEDs, I can just screw in a bulb, because we've created a form factor that's very much the same. But that doesn't take into consideration the incredible amount of lighting we use in other ways. So, for example, you have a cell phone, there's a little red light there. You could never do that with incandescent. You could not possibly put the old-fashioned lighting into applications that we have today. Take Christmas tree lighting. When I was in Sweden in 2009 at one of our Podcast City conferences, the city of Malmö was lit up, and all the trees are lit up with lighting, and it's a form of lighting that's very exciting, and it's multicolored. Never in 1,000 years could you do that with incandescent lighting. It's all because of LEDs that we have a transformational experience with lighting. We're building homes in Montana right now, and I just got a set of drawings this morning from our new lighting people. It's all based on LEDs, and the quality of lighting in the home will be just spectacular compared to what you have today. I had before. So when you say solar energy will not replace, that's a good thing. Why are we trying to use solar energy to run a 2-ton chunk of metal in order to get around? That's absurd. I can get around so much easier with lighter weight, lower energy solutions. Oil ain't what it's cracked up to be, because you have a field with 100 units of oil, you get down to 90, you get down to 63, you get down to 58, you get down to 20. Now what do? You put that in a car, don't you?
Mm.
Now what happens when you put it into a car? That oil in a car is moving 2 tons of metal and 200 kilos. Let's use metric tons. 5% of what you're moving is a human being, because it's one person in a car. Give the benefit of the doubt, there's 2 people in a car. Okay, 10%.
Yeah.
Let's say there's two heavy guys, each one of them weighing 100 kilos, riding around in a car. That's 10%. So you take this 20-odd% here. The human part of the load is only 5% of the load. So 5% of 20% is 1%. But wait a minute. The internal combustion engine is only 10, 15% efficient. So you're actually, when you get a barrel of oil in the field, only moving a person is a fraction of 1%. It's not even 1% efficient. Okay, take the Tesla car. When I started driving an electric car in 1980, the first question people asked me was, how far can it go? Well, the answer to that is depends upon how many tons of batteries I want to put in my car and drag around with me. No, I want an electric car that has a 10-mile range, and I want to put it in a confined network such that I can recharge it whenever I need to go further. Because I don't need to carry batteries around with me. Batteries are just like, what if the system has a temporary failure? I can go to the next station and get out and charge it there. You see, the whole idea of replacing the things we do now with solar energy, we don't have to. We have figured out ways to do things with less. And
yeah, but the point, sorry, I'm just going to say that, I mean, I think the point here that Art wants to make is that there are so many things like that are oil-based, like plastics and so on, that are made out of petroleum or natural gas, fertilizers and so on, and that we have to shrink the whole economy to a size that resembles the energy we need.
So let's go to Fatih Birol. I can't confirm this, but he came to our 2004 International ASPO meeting in Berlin. And then he was the chief economist. Now he's the leader, the managing director of the International Energy Agency. And he knows very well about peak oil. So why is he talking about climate change all of a sudden? In the last couple of years, I think he has gone into a panic mode about oil. And the only way he figures he can communicate with people is by talking about climate change, because people understand that. They don't understand peak oil. And besides, peak oil is like going to the cemetery and finding out where you're going to, put your dead body when you're gone. People are not very happy about peak oil because it's talking about something going away. You see, we're losing something. Well, I think that Birol is promoting getting off of oil because of climate change, because he knows that long before climate change does us in, we're going to hit a brick wall and we're going to not be able to produce our transportation, all these lovely things that Art is talking about. Oh, we're going to lose our seaports. We're going to lose our international trade. Well, I got news for you. We are going to lose it because we're not paying attention. We are not cutting down on our use of oil. And because of that, when the time comes, it's going to go smack down and fall in the tank and in no time.
Yeah. So there are 2 aspects here.
Yeah.
The one is that you're admitting or you're recognizing that we have this issue, obviously, with declining oil coming soon and natural gas. But on the other hand, you're also seeing that there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, a lot of solar energy and so on that we do not utilize, that we can at least create the conditions to adapt to this new reality. That will be super hard in so many ways, but we still have to adapt. We still have to face it,
right.
So I thought we could talk a little bit about, there are many different solar technologies, but one that is really interesting is instead of just having solar panels to generate electricity, that we should do as well, but solar thermal or solar heating is super interesting, because you can store up to, the efficiency could be between 60 to 80%, I think. And you have an approach, people don't know you so much, but you're also, as you mentioned, you're building houses as well. And you helped me a bit to design my house. And what you pointed out early on in my idea process with my house, that Johan, you have to think about how you're placing your house towards the sun, and the wall and the windows and so on,
Right.
that they should be south facing. So maybe we could talk a little bit concrete what people can do, either with new buildings, if they're building a new one, but also maybe with people, which is most people, with the buildings they have. What can they do to decrease their energy use using solar?
Exactly. Well, first of all, if you look around, you'll see that all the buildings that we already have fall into several different categories. But basically what happens is that houses get placed in their orientation to their street and not to the sun. So if the street is going like this diagonally to the compass, north-south compass, what's going to happen is that if this happens to be the southwest side, you're going to bake in the afternoon. And if your house is situated where, it's like this, so that you only get a little tiny bit of sun on the south side, and maybe you've got a view over here. And if you're looking from one vantage point or another, what you're going to find mostly is that people do not have enough sun coming in on the south side of their houses. So you could conceivably, I've helped several people with this, you can rearrange your house with some remodeling to take in more sunshine. But another thing you can do, particularly in the southern parts of the northern hemisphere, the sunny areas where you have too much sun, is the key thing there is to have an exterior shade during the hot time of the day. So if you have a nice view out there, but the sun is streaming into your west-facing window, or your southwest especially, then what you have to do is you have to put the shade on the outside and not have drapes on the inside, because once it hits the glass, it's coming through that thermal barrier, and now you're going to trap that heat inside your home, and you're going to have an oven. And I see so many people, even now, without paying attention, they build themselves houses with a nice view out there, and you're looking at an oven, because you did not take into consideration the pattern that the sun follows, and you're not going to change that. So adaptation like this can be a major part for the individual. So I'm going to talk about the individual. I also want to talk about how this whole thing is going to unfold based on what Art was saying. He says we have to continue to use oil in order to maintain this economy. Well, maintaining this economy is a folly. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen if we keep on pumping up and holding up our system, we're actually going to speed up the race to the bottom, especially in the United States. Over the last 10 years, we've been celebrating the fact that we've got more oil than anybody else, and we're taking it out of the ground, but we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and we're going to hit a brick wall, and it could happen, as Art mentioned, in the next couple of years. It might be 10 years, but whenever it happens, we're going to be so surprised, because nobody is talking about what's on the other side of this. And so we really only have two choices. One is a radical, smooth transition off of oil, and the other is to continue in the folly that we have enough oil to carry on indefinitely, and then we're going to hit a cliff. And I don't care now what happens in that scenario. When we get to this cliff, as it were, then if there's a solar panel over there, what's going to happen if it's in an accessible place is people are going to steal them. But I'll tell you what, the guy that has stolen one solar panel is going to be way ahead of the guy that has none. So there's going to be a very unsettling period of time where solar panels, individual solar panels, are going to sell like hotcakes. They're going to become that's what people are going to trade with. What difference does it make if I have a silver dollar if I can't get electricity? But we've come to depend upon electricity in so many ways, and it is very valuable. I mean, it's incredible that, Benjamin Franklin, for example, in 1752, that's when he flew this kite and he found out that, he could take static electricity and kind of like put it in a jar. It was, only a couple 300 years ago when people finally learned how to do anything with electricity in a controlled, useful manner. The light bulb was invented only 5 years before my grandfather was born. This is a brand new thing for all of humanity, but we've become very dependent upon it. We're much more dependent upon electricity than we are upon oil. And so what we've got to do, in my view of things, is really start looking at ways that we can almost trick people into getting off of oil, regardless of whether we have an alternative in place. And the fact that we're still giving subsidies and encouraging further exploitation of oil it's a dead end street. Again, that's going to take us to, we're going to grow a little bit more and then we're going to crash. The alternative is, for whatever reason, whether it's for climate change or for just because of good sense, we're getting off of oil, or even maybe we think about our future generations. Art said the other day on your program that oil is relatively cheap. You know why it's cheap? It's because we're stealing it from our children and our children's children. That's why it's cheap. We're stealing it from the future. And nobody from the future is here now to defend themselves against us stealing all of those resources that could be available to future generations if we had the slightest notion of how valuable that would be to them in that time of the future. And we're making silly little things out of plastic, and there's all kinds of trinkets and nonsense.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask you, Ron, that's a good transit to next question.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what can we do concretely? You mentioned a few things, but I thought like there are so many single-use items out there, and also like toys and things like that are made of petroleum-based plastic that we just throw away.
Yep.
A lot of waste, it's a waste of energy. And I also got one of the comments on Art's previous conversation with Art was that we're wasting so much energy. What about that? Can we just, save and conserve energy and have alternatives and so on? In that way, at least buying time, and also, as you mentioned, moving on with solar as much as we can and other ways that are the future.
So there's a saying in the Bible that you don't use old wineskins to put new wine in it. And a wineskin, for whatever reason, I don't remember, I never studied this, but wineskins, after one use, they become, or maybe a couple uses, they become weakened, and you put new wine in an old wineskin and it bursts on you. So what we're doing here with the electric car, I mean, it's kind of a necessary part of the transition, but the automobile itself fit fairly well in a suburban lifestyle. Maybe it's useful in a rural lifestyle because instead of actually an automobile, you have a pickup truck and you're carrying things around. If you're a workman who needs to carry things around with you, of course, a truck is a handy thing to have. But if you're an urban person who needs to get to work in the morning, the last thing you want to do is get in a car, because you're taking up so much space. And here's the thing. Let's go to transportation. I have a train, which is a linear train, not like our system, which is a mesh network that covers the whole city. We've got a train, and you live over here a couple miles. So what you do is you take a car, which weighs 2 tons and takes up a lot of space, and you bring it over here to the train station. And when you get to that train station, what you have to do is abandon this transportation unit and let it sit there for 10 hours. Now, it's not doing anything in transportation during that.
No, it's not. You're talking about like the classic problem. A car is sitting there idly in 90% of the time, and 95% of the time.
Yeah. So you're a poor person, okay? So you come in and let's say you can afford the payments for a car that costs $5,000, an old used car, but you bought it on time. So you just have enough money to pay for that. What's the parking space at the train station look like for you? Well, I got news for you. That's a Rolls Royce. In order to make that parking space that you can't afford, they had to spend as much money as a Rolls Royce to put in your old beater car there. Now, guess what? The only way that works is with a subsidy. So it turns out that instead of finding a creative way to get from here to there, we continue to give life support to this dead albatross, dead, you know, dinosaur, in order to stay to maintain the status quo. We're talking about equity in transportation. Well, equity in transportation is get rid of the car and make whatever else you put in place attractive to all the people, not just you know, a desperate accommodation to poor people where they have to stand for 20 minutes in the rain and snow or heat for a bus to come by. In other words, the wealthy will never do that. So what if we bring that station over here close enough to your home that you just walk to it? Well, then in that case, the station, instead of costing $100 million here, especially with its very expensive parking garage, we can do that for $500,000 or $1 million. Now, for that one station that costs $100 million, I can build 100 stations, and those stations can be spread out all over the community. I can use the existing roadways, and I can get over there. So I say, hallelujah, we're getting off of oil. Because when I keep using solar energy to support this monstrosity of the automobile, I am using too much energy and I'm using too much materials. I'm using too much space, and especially the space. I drive my car into downtown San Francisco. Nowadays, it doesn't cost you that much to drive there, maybe a couple dollars worth of gasoline. I get to San Francisco, I pay $50 for a parking space.
Yeah, I agree with you, but then there are the other side of it. People will of course argue, including Art. I think that okay, then the system will collapse. The economic growth system will collapse because the financial system.
But I got news
you
for
get
you.
that.
It's going to collapse. Yeah. Hello, it's going to collapse. Now, what are your choices? Your options are to have a solar panel available to you when it collapses and use it in the meantime, or maybe 10 solar panels so you can actually live comfortably with that. And if it comes to rough times, you can take the solar panels off your roof and hand them over to your neighbors, and everybody in the neighborhood at least has one solar panel. Okay, because you at least kind of run. This is going to happen. We are not going to go through this transition without a disaster, no matter how you look at it. So come back to what I was showing you earlier. I look at when exporters become importers, what happens? And you have many distinguished members of this. In 1993, China became an importer, and they kicked off their economy in the 80s by being exporters of all things. Nobody remembers that Ronald Reagan thrived because in Jimmy Carter's regime in the 70s, there wasn't enough oil to go around, and Carter took it in the chin in 79. And then here, the world was awash in oil because China was an exporter during the entire Reagan era, and then Indonesia, and then United Kingdom, and then Egypt. And remember all that stir, the Arab Spring, and everybody was saying, "Oh, democracy is coming to Egypt." It had everything to do with oil economy. And Mubarak, who was an old guy, he lost his bid to fame and fortune when he ran out of money to pay off his, buy out his opposition, and to make everybody feel good because they were paying a penny a kilowatt hour for electricity, 10 cents on the dollar. Everybody was getting a free ride. And then when they ran out of exports, they no longer had that revenue to work with. Same in Vietnam and Malaysia, Syria, Argentina, Yemen. And of course, we were the granddaddy of them all way back when. So my girlfriend her daughter was living in in
The big time.
Indonesia,
And yeah.
right in this point here, just before. And what happened? See, this is going down, and the IMF showed up and met with the Presidente, and they said, "Look, dude, you've got to stop giving every energy resource away." So energy for those people were um, electricity, bus fares, train fares, and gasoline. And so when the IMF came along and threatened them, they doubled all the prices all at once. It was 1998. And they had riots. And you know how these riots were explained to us in the media? Those riots were explained as some, rebellion against it was communistic or some fool thing.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it was the IMF showing up and saying, you're becoming an importer of oil. You no longer going to have the revenue. You're not paying off your loans fast enough. And we're going to. So what did the Indonesia have? They had riots. What's the United States going to have when this big hoopla that we're going through right now comes to an end? It's going to be very, very dangerous. Well, guess what? When a country like the United States became a net importer, we had the clout to set the price by printing up these piece of paper we call money, dollars. It's just printing press, and we dominated the world economy, and thereby we were able to print money in order to fool people into thinking they were getting some value back for having sold us oil for 10 cents on the dollar. And I had a very interesting experience at that 2004 Podcar City Conference in Berlin. There were a couple of Norwegians guys there. And I said, look, you guys, you have a very small population. It's about the 10th the population of the UK. You in the UK have about the same amount of oil in the North Sea. I mean, it's different, but they're in the ballpark. So in the case of England, all the oil they have now is being used for England. It's because they went over the line. They are now net importers. Norway is still a net exporter, like Nigeria and Angola. And so I teased these guys. I said, you guys are in a third world country because all you're doing is selling your oil, like raw materials. You're selling this for peanuts. Our future generations, a barrel of oil is going to be worth $1,000, not $100. It's going to be worth real money. And so why are we tricking ourselves by propping up this monstrosity and still driving these 2-ton cars to move 200 pounds of people? Or, it's insane. I can design and build a car that's perfectly comfortable with maybe 400 or 500 pounds, by way of example, but it would not compete with the ones that are there. So guess what? If we create some neighborhood micro mobility systems, scooters, bicycles, maybe enclosed little bubbles that, are fragile, and then get the high-speed stuff out of the way completely. And if you need to move a piano with a big truck, well, you restrict the piano truck loader to 5 miles an hour, 5 kilometers an hour, and you govern it so it can't go any faster. You're only moving a piano once in a great while. You don't need the rush, hurry, hurry. And if we can deliver packages by drones, for example, we don't need this big truck over here that's running around dropping off stuff, the courier services. So basically what I'm getting at is that we're heading for a disaster, no matter how you shake it. There, like I said, there's two things coming. One is we're either going to decline gracefully in the use of oil by being sensible and rational about it, or we're going to be irrational. We're going to continue to grow, and then bam, it's going to cut off like, and then the only thing you're going to be able to work with is what? Solar panels that somebody else bought because you didn't have this foresight to understand that this was coming. And I'll take a panel off my roof and I got to get food, right? I need food. So I'm going to sell my solar panel to you in exchange for some food. Now you can wander off. That's assuming that that people aren't using guns to do this. If we're still trading, I can trade my surplus of solar panels to you for a little bit of food. I mean, we're talking about this world as we know it today, especially in the United States. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And we are not paying the slightest attention to the fact that what Art was the first to coin the term, this is a retirement party. But this particular retirement party, we have no savings. The only savings we can put in place now before this crisis comes is solar panels, because they're tangible, and I can unscrew something at a commercial building over here because I'm running a criminal, mafia ring of some kind, and I can have a black market of selling solar panels. But that's better than everybody being completely stranded out with nothing.
Yeah. I can just finally end this. I agree with you completely, Ron. And I got another comment from to Art's recent talk from a person who has had solar heaters installed for 42 years in the US. Right. And he said that, yeah, they haven't made any service on them. So as you said, if you invest in solar panels, it's not a general solution. We're not saying that, but it's a very good investment, and something that could be very valuable in the times ahead.
My solar water heater is 15 years old, and the other water heater, not the solar one, but the other water heater that it connects to as a backup, has a little bit of corrosion on it. We're getting it fixed in the next few weeks, but it's still running. And there's nothing wrong with the solar panel. It's still plugging away, 15 years.
We have covered a lot in a short time, Ron, and I think we can talk for hours. But let's come back to the subject and others. And if people are interested to know more about you and the PRT system, podcasts and so on, check out previous episodes, and I think we can come back to that as well in the future. But it's super interesting what you're doing, Ron. And thank you so much for coming on with such a short notice.
Sure, of course.
That was all for today, folks. I hope you appreciate the conversation. Share what you think in the comments below. And if you like the show, don't forget, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I hope to see you next time.